Hello friends, welcome to A Gentle Healing Journey. My name is Rain Francis, and on this channel I talk about how to deal with life's struggles and challenges. I'm working my way through my psychology diploma and my life coaching certification, and as I gain knowledge and I apply this knowledge to my life and my experiences, I am so happy to share it here on YouTube with this community. Tell me something. If your spouse, your wife, your husband, your life partner passed away tomorrow, would you be ready for the chaos that follows? If I'm really honest with you, I wasn't ready. If you follow my channel, you know that my late husband passed away about a year ago. He died by suicide. He was very troubled, and our relationship was very unhealthy the last few years. He threatened suicide many times before, and he talked about it a lot. After he passed away, and after speaking with members of his family and his former friends, and reading medical reports that he had had in his files, I realized that he had suicide ideation for most of his life. Deep down inside, if I'm really honest with myself, I kind of knew that he was going to take his life, but there was still that little part of me that hoped that he wouldn't. That's why I often say that I wasn't surprised, but I was very shocked when I found him that morning. Because I was so unprepared, I had to deal with things as they came. And it almost felt unfair because all I wanted to do was grieve, but I couldn't grieve. I had to take care of the business of death. I had to contact his estranged family and friends and help them through their grief as well. I had to adjust my finances and my habits. I felt obliged to follow through on his last wishes. None of this could wait. It all had to be done during a time when all I wanted to do was be alone and cry and grieve. So I feel as though now enough time has passed that I can talk about this without falling apart. It happened on May 14th of 2025. We were discussing separation, and he had agreed to move out of the house. About 1 week before he passed away, he started one of his kind of typical fights with me where it resulted in him giving me the silent treatment. This happened so often throughout our 12-year marriage. It almost felt like he needed to release negative feelings, so he would start a fight with me, and my reaction of standing up for myself would enrage him and justify him into giving me the silent treatment, then swearing at me and ignoring me, and then swearing at me again, and then continuing the fight for as long as he needed to get whatever it was out of his system. This was the norm that I was used to, that nobody should be used to. I spoke about being held as an emotional hostage in the marriage in another video, and I'll link that up in the cards and also in the description below. And in hindsight, I realized that he started this fight to make the act of taking his life easier on himself. If he hated me and resented me, well, maybe ending his life may not have been so hard. I don't know if that makes any sense. I truly feel like this is why he started that fight with me 1 week before he died, because we didn't speak to each other during that entire week before he died. At that point, we'd had separate bedrooms for, 4 years, mainly due to our sleep schedules, but in the end, it was because of the broken relationship. So he spent basically 23 hours a day in his room in the dark with the door locked, and he only came out while I was asleep. He would use the kitchen and the bathroom, but only when he knew he didn't have to see me or bump into me. I remember during that week, his last week, trying to engage him in conversation, but he would act as though that I didn't even exist. And then I finally noticed that he was wearing these Bluetooth thingies in his ears, and I could hear the music playing. He had his music playing, I guess, pretty much all the time, so he didn't have to hear what was going on in the house with me and with the pets. And I remember the day before he died, I saw him more that day than I'd seen him in a week, because he was cleaning up his room. He was vacuuming, he was changing his cat's litter, he was moving things around. And I remember he was in and out of the bathroom because his cat had to be kept separate from the other pets, just due to the fact that they didn't get along. So he put his cat in the bathroom with the door closed when he was vacuuming and when he was cleaning up his room. And I remember waking up, I wanted to go to the bathroom because, I had just woken up, and he blocked my way into the bathroom without even looking at me. So I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, "Alex, I just want to pee and brush my teeth." And his whole body stiffened. And he pulled away from me like that, as though I had infected him with some kind of deadly disease. I just remember feeling that pain of rejection and kind of saying out loud, "Never mind." And I just went into the bathroom. I pushed my way in and I closed the door. I knew he hadn't heard me anyway because I could hear the music playing in his earphones. But I was just so disappointed. That was the last thing I ever said to him. Never mind. But he didn't even hear me. So the next morning when I woke up, I did my usual thing, which was I took the dogs for their walks. I got my coffee ready. I did my exercise. I checked my email, and in my inbox, there was an email from him where he transferred money into my account. And this was very unusual at that time because he wasn't contributing any money the last few months of his life, but that was okay because we had both agreed that he was going to move out at the end of May 2025, so he had to save his money. I knocked on his door, but of course there was no answer, which again was not unusual. So I ended up replying to his email and I asked him why was he sending me money? But something deep down in my gut told me that there was something really wrong happening. But, the bathroom door was closed. His door was closed. I had no idea which room he was in or if I could go in. So I went to the bathroom in the basement. We have a second bathroom down there. And then I decided, okay, I want to mow the lawn. And in my head, I thought, okay, after I mow the lawn, I'm going to go into one of those rooms or both and see if he's okay. I was feeling very uneasy, but I was also afraid because whenever I used to go into his room when he didn't want to see me, he would rage at me. So part of me didn't even want to go into the rooms, but my gut was telling me that, something's wrong here. So I mowed the lawn as quickly as I could. It took me half an hour, which normally it would take me an hour and a half. And when I got inside, the first thing I did was I put the dogs in the back room in their cages. And then I went to the bathroom door and I knocked and there was no response. And I opened the door and I saw that his cat was in there with the litter box and food and water. And I knew at that point that Alex was gone. No one had to tell me. I knew that he had taken his life at that point because of all of the things that were leading up to that particular moment. I was honestly terrified. I was visibly shaking, and I knocked on his bedroom door and I opened up the door and I called his name. The room was dark. There was no answer. I flicked on the light and I saw him. I touched him and he was clearly not alive, and I ran out of the house in a panic with my phone and I called 911 right away. So that's what happened that morning, my friends. And what followed was all of the chaos. The ambulance technicians were the first to arrive, with the police arriving about 10 minutes later. The ambulance technician went into his room and he confirmed that he had been dead for quite some time. He actually went like this. The police questioned me about him and about the death and about our relationship. One of the officers asked me to come to his car to give a statement, which I did. What shocked me was that he asked me if I was responsible or involved somehow with his death. Did I in any way assist him? The constable probably realized how shocked I was seeing me after he asked me these things, and he said, "Look, we have to ask. Even though it looks to be clearly a suicide, it's our protocol." So the coroner arrived about a half hour later and confirmed that he had been dead for a very long time. And, when I started to consider it, I realized that he probably took his life shortly after he had sent me the money to my checking account, which was at about 2 in the morning. And I figured this because I remembered hearing the bathroom door creaking in the middle of the night. And that's probably when he put his cat in there. I had initially felt a lot of guilt when I found him. I felt like I should have been doing something to try to resuscitate him or help him. But I felt he was cold, and I was in such a state of shock from what I had just seen and touched. I had the overwhelming urge to escape the house. But after speaking to the coroner and him telling me that he had probably been dead for about 10 to 12 hours, it really helped ease that guilt that I was feeling at the time. Now, the coroner asked me if I had a funeral home in mind. Again, this was like, what? Because, of course, I didn't. He asked if I was thinking of burial or cremation. And keep in mind, this was all happening so quickly after I had found him. I was in such shock. But I knew that Alex wanted to be cremated. We'd talked about that. So I said cremation. And the coroner recommended a funeral home that he had in mind. And it was about an hour's drive away. And he said that the owners were extremely empathetic and compassionate. So what could I do? I agreed, right? I had no other choice or no other knowledge. So the coroner called the funeral home on my behalf, and he arranged for somebody to come and pick up my husband. Meanwhile, the ambulance and the police were still there, and I was sitting on my kitchen chair and at my table with a really tall glass of wine, freaking out and not knowing what was going on. The coroner was talking to me, and we were making chit-chat, and it was so surreal. I remember asking him, like, so how'd you get into the business of being a coroner, you know? And he said, oh, I'm a retired police officer. I applied for the job, and they hired me. And he said most coroners are retired doctors, retired police officers, or people in the medical field. You don't go to school necessarily to be a coroner. So I'm like, okay, well, how can you handle seeing dead people every day? And he said, it's disturbing, but you somehow find a way to separate it into it just being your job. And I thought that was interesting at the time. And the chit chat, although it was very surreal, it was really distracting, which was good. Because about an hour later, the funeral home showed up, and the coroner advised me that I should probably go for a drive or something while they removed the body, because in his experience, he thought it was the best thing that the loved ones didn't see the black bag leaving the home and being put into the hearse. I didn't go for a drive, but I did go to the back of the house into the back room, and I stayed with the dogs while they did that. And then at one point, everyone was gone, and I was all alone. And I just wanted to say at this point, from the time I called 911 to the time the hearse drove away with my husband, took about 4 to 5 hours. And this is very quick. A friend told me that she knew someone once who had to wait an entire day for the coroner to arrive. And this person's deceased loved one just stayed where it was until the coroner got there. So I have to say I'm very grateful that I live in a very small rural community, because everything happened in a very timely manner. So throughout that morning, I had been in touch with several friends who were there for me. And I spoke about grief loneliness in another video, which I will also link as well. And despite my friends being there throughout the entire ordeal and ever since, I felt a profound loneliness. My house was filled with dogs, and at that time 2 cats, and I was talking on the phone, texting, messaging with friends and neighbors, but I still felt extremely lonely. I had contacted one of my neighbors on the advice of a good friend right after I called 911 because I was afraid of being alone. I thought I was going to faint. He and his wife were nowhere near home, but they contacted many people in my little community to see if anyone could come and spend some time with me. Wasn't that nice? A beautiful woman, her name is Sarah, she showed up. I had never met her before, but she spent hours with me here. It was such a beautiful act of kindness, but After all was said and done and everybody left, the reality of the situation hit me very hard. I really didn't know what to do. It was still very surreal for me, and that there was so much shock, and I felt so alone. My late husband, however, did me a good favor by having a last will and testament. He didn't drive, and I remember he asked me to drive him to town one day. It was about a month and a half before he died. It was a building that had a medical clinic in it, so I thought, okay, he's just going to the doctor. He didn't want to tell me why he wanted the lift, so I just stopped asking. But what I didn't know was that there was a notary office in the building, and he was having his last will and testament notarized. So he had been planning this for a few months, likely a few weeks after the reality set in, when he knew that I was serious this time about asking him to move out and separating for a while to see if we could come back to each other in a healthier, more mature way. After everyone was gone that morning, I went into that room, his room, and it was clean as a whistle. There was no evidence that anyone had lived there. All of his belongings, all of his books, his guitars, his music stuff, all gone. I couldn't figure out what I was seeing. I never once saw him packing his things and putting his things away. Even all of his clothes were gone. I later discovered a bunch of boxes in the basement where he had stored everything, but I never heard him going up and down into the basement. So it must have been while I was sleeping at night. And because I was basically banned from his room for that last week when he was alive, I had no clue what he was doing. The only thing in that room was a box and an envelope. The envelope contained his last will and testament, and the box contained the ashes of one of our other cats who had passed away years earlier. There was no goodbye note, nothing like that. Though I searched after days for days through his things to see if he had hidden one, but it was desperate on my part because I was devastated. You know, it was just another thing that I had to process, unfortunately. But just as I was reading through his last will and testament, I received an email from him. This was panicking and confusing. He had pre-scheduled it for a certain time when I guess he figured his body would have been found, because he started the email off by saying, "Rain, I'm sorry that I couldn't trust you, but I wanted to be 100% in control of this final action. Everything should be over with by now, so why don't we talk about what's important?" He went on to tell me why he sent me the money, that the original last will and testament made me the sole beneficiary and executor of his estate. He told me he didn't want me to tell his family or his friends anything until his ashes were buried. He mentioned where he wanted his ashes to be buried. He told me I could sell all of his things to make some money because he knew that I would be left in financial dire straits. It was so odd reading that email from him after I knew he was dead. And as I was reading it, I was kind of waiting for him to say something meaningful to me, but that never happened. The email was more like a list of chores that I had to complete and a list of things that I was to do and not to do, and it was really indifferent. The following day was a bit of a daze for me. The funeral home contacted me and confirmed that the coroner didn't require an autopsy, which he told me the other day, because it was clear and obvious it was a suicide. And they asked me if I wanted them to start the process of cremation, and they told me how much it would cost. And Alex had mentioned in his will that he didn't want a funeral, he didn't want anything fancy, he just wanted to be cremated and put into a box. So the woman told me it would be about $4,000, which I didn't have, but she also advised me that I could contact social services here and that they would likely pay for the cremation cost. So I did. I contacted them and they agreed, but I had to go in and talk to Alex's caseworker because he was on social assistance. I told the lady at the funeral home, "Yep, go ahead, go ahead with the process, and she said she would call me when his ashes were ready to be picked up. And this was just the beginning of all the work that I had to do after his death and for his estate. And I'll continue this in another video next week. I just wanted to share the story of that day last May when I found my late husband lying in his hammock, having taken his life. When I share my story, it's cathartic in a way that helps me to heal, but it's also cathartic in another way where I feel as though by sharing my story, other people may be relating to it and they may not feel so alone. It's so hard to find other people who share your story about a spouse who has been abusive. He's died by suicide, and the chaos that follows all of that. And it's not just chaos with regards to the estate, it's chaos with regards to emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and financial well-being. I know that a lot of people would be curious to know how he died, but that's one detail that I don't want to make public because I don't want to glorify it. In his last will and testament, he made it very clear that he wanted me to announce how and why he took his life. I thought it was important to honor his wishes, but like I said, in no way do I want to glorify what he did. And of course, why he did it. He was very specific on why he didn't want to live anymore. And part of that was due to what he perceived as the final breakup of our marriage. I was under the assumption that we were both going to go to therapy. We were both going to work on ourselves, and we were both going to come back to each other in a healthy, loving way after spending some time apart and developing a new appreciation for each other. But for him, it was final. That was one of the reasons why he took his life. But there were many others, but that was one of them. But like I said, I don't really want to divulge his method publicly or the other reasons. I think that every adult has the right to make their own choice with regards to life and death when it comes to their own life and death, But really, it does leave a path of chaos and shock and trauma behind. And though I do have a great amount of empathy for the pain that he was suffering, sometimes it's hard to feel compassion in my heart when I'm going through the grief of what was left behind after his shocking death. So my friends, I will end this video on that note, and in the next video, which will come out next week, I'll talk about what I went through with regards to his estate after his death. And maybe this will help people to understand what actually happens and what they need to be prepared for, because we're not prepared. If ever you'd like to send me a message or ask me to discuss a topic, please feel free to leave comments on the videos or go check out my channel description. That's where you'll find my email, and I'm happy to receive your email. So my friends, thank you again so much for watching and allowing me to share my story. Be well, and I'll see you next time. Bye.